Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the podcast, series host Meredith Zonsius talks with Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasurer on the 11th period results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This refreshing update focuses on signs of improvement with view to getting back to work. Topics of discussion also cover how Treasury and finance professionals feel about their organization's outlook on liquidity positions, economic improvements, time estimates for health and financial normalcy, and more. Listen in on this informative discussion on the global recovery and stay tuned in the weeks ahead. Craig and Alexa, it's great to have you both back on the show.
Thanks, Meredith. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to be on this one too.
We are now 11 survey periods into the Global Recovery Monitor. Let's start off with the top headlines.
Yeah, I'll start off with some of the big improvements, some of the significant improvements we've seen. One thing was interesting when we asked the freeform question, what's the most positive thing that's happened in the recent past? And it was getting back to work. So the return to work is getting a lot of people excited. The second thing had to do with AR liquidity. This has always been the most negative item in that category. It has long been the most negative. So for every one company positive, it's typically been 5 to 10 or more companies that have a negative view of AR, that it's deteriorated. And that's fallen into the range that we've liked to see in this mix, from down into the threes. Well, this period, it moved to 2 times negative. And it is, for the first time, not the most negative on a week-over-week basis. Fiscal activities by the central government, whatever headquarter government you're in, were viewed more negative. And so that's a significant change, since it's every period it's been the most negative. It no longer is. And then finally, this is an ongoing story, is organizational liquidity improved, and it was about 30% were more positive versus 18.5% were more negative. And so this is 7 survey periods with a positive move. So pretty interesting positive items here. It's not all positive, but those are some of the positive ones. Alexa?
Yeah, I'll make some comments on the economic improvements here. So the 3-month is by far still the highest, and we're almost at an equilibrium. And this is just a little bit higher than the last period. The 12-month outlook has dipped back quite a bit. And from this measure, that makes the full economic recovery at about 4 months out. So if you remember from last period, we were at 7 months. So that shift down to 4 months is quite a big swing for a period-to-period change.
This past survey period, we have added in a few survey questions on positive data, developments, and GDPs in home countries. Can you walk us through some of these period findings?
The most positive data or development in the freeform question, I mentioned one in the headline. It was the people getting back to work, businesses reopening and restarting, and the speed of the recovery. Those were all listed as quite high. There was other comments, obviously, about unemployment numbers improving, particularly in the U.S. The second category had to do with lower COVID rates, either rates of infection or rates of mortality. So that was the second. It was a health issue. And then the PPP, some of the paycheck protection activities, strengthening, supporting organizations, allowing them to keep staff, or at least that's the name in the U.S. There's other ones in other localities, but that was those were the top positive and developments. From the gross domestic product standpoint, we've seen a deterioration from the prior period. So as we look quarter over quarter, Q3 over Q2, it was only 21.1% had a positive look versus 26.9% last time. So 5% deterioration there, looking out next quarter over this quarter. Q4 over next quarter is 38.5% positive versus 43%. Another 5% of the population turned more negative. And then again, almost exactly 5% of Q1 2021 over Q4 2020 was viewed negative. So the big improvement is in Q1 next year over Q4 of this year. But everything turned more negative in terms of looking at the GDP from a countrywide perspective. So this is one of those economic indicators that's seems to be moving, economic perspectives that seems to be moving cross current to some of the more positive ones.
Interesting. You had said that there were some changes with top concerns. Can you give us a quick rundown on what those changes were?
Yeah, I'll be quick on some of those. So the top concerns in a separate forced ranking questionnaire. So those who've been reading the survey and listening to the podcast know we have a forced ranking set of 7 questions. This is a new one. Not that we're going to do it every week, but it has 8 categories. The top concern was COVID health issues, then the COVID response and impact of responding to the COVID virus. Number 3 was civil unrest in North America. So obviously a lot of things in the headlines. That made its way up to number 3. These were 3 very high on the list. Number 4 followed it with elections, and then there were other items as well. The last option was Brexit, and that was a non-issue, or the last or the second to last choice of most people. The weekly top concerns that everyone's used to, which we've had almost every period, they're all financial. Access to adequate liquidity, number 1. Number 2, direct financial impact to the organization. And 3, concern about recession in the regions that we operate in. So money and economic factors, the top concerns.
How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
The extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue has increased to the 11-month range. Last period, it was just at the 9-month range, so that is a 2-month jump. And then the inflection point this period is still sitting at 1 month, but compared to last period, less respondents are feeling that we've already hit the peak. And then for the financial normalcy in individual businesses, that came in at about 11 months, which has been pretty consistent in the prior periods.
And that's interesting, Alexa. The financial normalcy number, which you mentioned, is how people rate their own organization, which extended pretty close to what it was last period at 11 months. But you see some of the other views on the economic cycle out 3 months and 12 months, when people are looking more broadly, that's sitting about 4 months. So there's these cross currents, and kind of interesting to see how the views change over time as we move through the crisis to recovery and back to work.
Each week I ask you about AR. Any changes on the negative outlooks here?
Yeah, so as Craig mentioned above, period over period, the AR has still been negative, and it's sitting at about 2 times negative. But again, as you said, this is the best that it's been since the survey has started. And this is not the most negative piece for the liquidity factor of our survey. The fiscal policy was.
So before we wrap up the podcast, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
I'll mention a couple things. So as we look the next several weeks and the month or so, I would be interested to see if death rates or mortality rates stay low, because they've been suppressed more than I think they were in the beginning. If this decreases, will that further amplify some of the positive trends? If it bounces back up, I think we'd expect to see some negative outlooks. And then the second thing to look at, as we look at quarter over quarter, that's turned negative. And, as I look at that, I think Alexa and I have talked about it at some length. Is that signaling a lot more negative economic thunderstorms are coming that maybe we're not thinking of? Quarter 2 is not going to be a great quarter, because April was very bad. May was a bit of a rebound. I don't think anybody's suggesting that Q2 is good. So to see more people thinking Q3 will be worse than Q2, and Q4 not really seeing the recovery to Q4, does that really symbolize or signify most people are thinking there's a lot more thunderstorms on the front?
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.